Okay, it is 7 o'clock. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome all members of the public, councillors, parish representatives and officers to the Planning Committee. This meeting is being streamed live and it is capable of repeated viewing. If you are seated in the public area of the council chamber, it is likely that your image will be captured by the recording cameras and result in your image becoming part of the broadcast. This may infringe your human rights, and if you wish to avoid this, you should leave the public seating area of the council chamber and move to the upper public gallery. Could I ask everyone to note the fire safety instruction that on hearing the alarm, you should leave the building by the nearest marked exit and congregate, I'm going to have to cough, congregate at the assembly point in the car park. Also, please switch all electronic devices being used to silent. My name is Councillor Philip Minot and I am the Chair. On my left is the Vice Chair, Councillor Martin Cuthbert. The co-opted parish councillors are situated along the second row of benches. Members of the Planning Committee sit on the front row of benches and only those councillors who are members of the Planning Committee are entitled to vote. For clarity, as we go through the agenda this evening, members of the committee will be permitted to speak for up to 5 minutes on each item. Any other members and parish councillors will be permitted a maximum of 3 minutes to speak with permission from the Chair. May I remind members to declare any pecuniary or non-pecuniary interests and the nature of the interest at the beginning of an agenda item, and that on declaring a pecuniary interest you are required to leave the meeting when that item of business is considered. There should be no interaction from the public areas at any time during the meeting. Members of the public invited to speak on tonight's applications will only be permitted to speak for 3 minutes if they have indicated to do so in advance as a representative or as an applicant agent on specific applications. Requests to speak should have been received by the clerk by yesterday at 4 o'clock. In the event of a disturbance such as calling out from the public area during the meeting, a request from the Chair to be quiet will be given, but if the problem persists, any persons interrupting the meeting will be asked to leave. If necessary, the meeting will be adjourned to allow this to take place. And I'll just say, since I haven't got one on, anybody else who's got a jacket on that they'd like to take off is perfectly fine as far as I'm concerned. We're slightly less hot than we were, but it's still quite warm. Right, so the first item on the agenda is apologies for absence. Mrs O'Borman, have any apologies been received?
Thank you, Chair. No apologies have been received, but we have had a notice that Councillor Baksh is on his way. Thank you.
Yep. So, declarations of interest. Are there any interests to be considered? I'm going to declare an interest, obviously non-pecuniary interest, because I'm both a member of the Essex Wildlife Trust and I'm also a member of the Woodland Trust on the item that we've got in front of us. Councillor Gorton.
Thank you, Chair. I'm also a member of the Essex Wildlife Trust and I'm also a ward councillor for a neighbouring ward, Ingatstone, Fryning and Mount Nessing. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor McShane.
I'm currently interested in that I farm next door to the development and I used to farm a field some years ago.
Thank you, Councillor McShane. Just also to note the two organisations I mentioned that I'm a member of had an opportunity to respond to this, but they haven't actually responded. They haven't raised any objections to the item that we have in front of us, which we'll get to in just a minute. But the next thing is item 3, which is minutes of the meeting of the Planning Committee on the 30th of June. Are the minutes of the meeting on that day agreed? Agreed? Yeah. Okay, so we now move to planning applications and matters. The committee will now determine the planning applications and matters before it. Before we begin consideration of the applications before us this evening, I would like to remind all members and those attending that this is a quasi-judicial meeting. In discharging our planning responsibilities, councillors must determine each application impartially, fairly and in accordance with the planning law, the council's adopted planning policies and any material planning considerations. Yes. Members are not acting in a political capacity when determining planning applications. Decisions must be based solely on the planning merits of each case, and political affiliation must play no part in the determination of individual applications. Our role is to ensure that each application is considered openly, objectively, and in accordance with the statutory planning framework. May I just also, again, remind those members of the public who will be addressing the committee on planning applications tonight that your speech should be no longer than 3 minutes in duration and should relate purely to planning matters. When your name is called, will you please make your way to the chair provided? When you have completed your speech, the committee will debate the application and reach a decision. So, we have one item on the agenda tonight, and that is item 4, Fitzwalters Farm, Roman Road, Shenfield. And this is an application for a proposed solar farm, a battery energy storage system to include ground-mounted photovoltaic solar modules and associated infrastructure, access roads, cabling, inverter platforms, control room, substation, storage containers, battery compound, security fencing and CCTV, and temporary construction compound. This is application number 25/00813/FUL with an officer recommendation to approve, and the case officer is Mr. Darrell Cook. Mr. Cook.
Thank you, Chair. This slide illustrates the site location plan accompanying the submission, which encompasses a series of fields severed by Hall Lane running through the centre of the site, with means of access taken from Roman Road to the east. This item has been brought to committee as officers consider it appropriate for members to determine, given its scale and location within the Greenbelt and the planning considerations involved. This slide provides an officer annotated red line using Google Maps to illustrate the broad area excluding the access point of the solar farm, just to give an indication of its proximity to Brentwood and surrounding areas. So the existing site comprises a series of fields, and that characterises the surrounding area, together with some urbanising influences such as the A12 boundary, which is directly to the south of the site. The orange yellowy circle towards the right hand side of the image is the location of the substation at Wash Road near the Talonway industrial estate, where the grid connection offer is located. As set out within the report, the grid connection does not form part of the application. This is not an uncommon approach for these types of schemes, but just to remind members that they are resolving determining whether the scheme would be an appropriate land use. Any engineering and highway works to facilitate the physical connection would require a separate application, and obviously all the considerations as part of that, and that's not before us this evening. So there's 6 fields in total, although within some documents it's referenced A through E and in numeric order as well, 1 through 6. So as I said, Hall Lane cuts through fields C and D on this particular site plan in the centre with the A12 below. The principal route of access for construction vehicles is via Roman Road to the east. That's the blue arrow to the right-hand side of the image. There is a crossing between the field gates between fields C and D, leading towards field E. However, Hall Lane is not proposed to operate as the primary construction route. As I said, access is to the east of the site, and that can be controlled through condition. There is residential development on the periphery of the site, including Shenfield and Hutton to the southeast, Pilgrim's Hatch to the west, Mount Nessing to the east, and some sporadic development to the north. Heritage assets are annotating using coloured star symbols on the screen. The Grade 2 star listed building is at the very bottom, and that's the church, St Mary's Church. Homewood, broadly circled in green, is an ancient woodland which falls outside of the red outline boundary, but is in close proximity to several fields. The development is proposing to retain a minimum 20-metre exclusion zone between any of the panels and that area, and that exceeds Natural England's standing advice. There's also other precautionary mitigation measures, including buffer zones near found badger sets, and that's what helps determine the extent of the red line boundary. This plan illustrates the proposed block plan which accompanies the submission. So the solar panels are located across all of the field parcels. The battery storage container and associated infrastructure are located within Field 3, which is directly to the south. That's kind of illustrated there by that green arrow. Construction compounds are also, or a construction compound is also located within Field 4, and that's kind of denoted by these rectangular yellow blocks on the screen. This slide illustrates the Landscape and Ecology Management Plan, or LEMP for short. The key has been enlarged and located on the right-hand side. Hopefully that does provide a bit of an indication of where key aspects are, but I can zoom in if necessary during the presentation or when there's any questions. The proposal would result in no loss of existing trees or hedgerows, and additional hedgerows are to be planted to provide screening at key points. So these are to be maintained at around 3 to 4 metres in height. So just for context, a standard fence panel is around 1.8 metres in height. So that would ensure that even the highest solar panel, which is restricted to be no more than 3 metres in height, is screened. A permissive footpath is proposed to the southwestern tip on screen, and that connects a couple of existing public rights-of-way, which are currently severed by the A12, and we can come on to talk about them in a second, but that's in that general location, bottom left of the image. So in terms of public rights-of-way, Brentwood 24 and 103 fall within Field E to the bottom left corner of the site, and again, their routes are currently severed by the A12. Brentwood 87 runs through Fields B and C in the middle of the screen, and then there are other footpaths surrounding towards the north and east of the site. So there are views within the site, and those effects are considered within the report. But the existing routes are to be retained to enable continued usability, and obviously in some cases there would be some improvement by that permissive footpath that we've just discussed. Again, this is just to illustrate that point a little bit further, is that as you approach the A12 coming from Brentwood 24, Brentwood 103, from the north you are met by the A12, and you'd kind of be taking your own life into your hands were you to try and cross at that point. So this diagram is for illustrative purposes only, and it shows the kind of basic journey of electricity from generation at the panels through to the national grid. So firstly, the solar panels capture that sunlight and generate electricity in the form of direct current, or DC. The electricity then passes through an inverter, and that converts it into alternating current, or AC, at quite a medium level voltage, so it can be used and stored by changing it from DC to AC. It can then be used by the electricity network. The electricity passes through an on-site substation where it's processed for export, and going through various sets of equipment, it ultimately is converted into high voltage, and the reason for that is to provide efficiency over long distances with the intent for it to travel underground. The battery energy system, which is also proposed as part of this scheme, is kind of for when there's surplus electricity. It allows it to be stored up so that when electricity demands vary throughout the day, that excess energy can be fed into the grid, so there's kind of providing continuity, reliability for the overall network. So we'll go through a series of drawings that have been submitted. So the following slides provide an overview of the type of infrastructure being proposed. This one illustrates a typical solar panel elevation. So all of those are orientated south, and as set out in the report, they're kind of spaced around 2.5 to 6.5 metres away from each other, and that really just depends on, site topography and exactly where they're going to be located. Generally, they will be around 2.7 metres high, but obviously dependent on topography, they could be slightly higher at 3 metres, and that is conditioned within the report. So this slide illustrates a series of different drawings here. So we've got the solar and battery inverters along the top, and they're very utilitarian in appearance, and equally you've got the battery unit to the bottom part of the screen, again quite utilitarian in appearance. This slide illustrates a customer cabin. You've got they're proposed to be a kind of darker shade of green. And this kind of equipment, again, is quite utilitarian in appearance, and it's standard kind of operational infrastructure, allowing, equipment to be safe, all the kind of technical aspects, and equipment will be stored in a lot of these storage kind of container buildings. Again, the control room is where the site's equipment is to be monitored and controlled to ensure it operates safe and efficiently. Kind of a dark green colour and aluminium with aluminium frames, panels, I should say. This slide illustrates the substation compound, which is again a series of electrical equipment stored and prepares the export to the electricity network. This slide provides typical details of the fencing and gates, and they would be up to 2 metres in height, with the aim to prevent deer from crossing into the solar array areas. But the detail does illustrate that there would be smaller openings for smaller animals to pass through towards the bottom part of the fence. Not sure how well that's come out, but effectively this slide is just showing some CCTV details of where they're going to, which are going to be strategically located around the site on the fencing, and that the intent is for the cameras all to be facing inward so that there's no infringement upon other properties. They'll deploy infrared technology and have motion detection, so they will be remotely monitoring the site, and therefore any intrusions can be responded to. So these two images show the first two fields near to Homewood, the ancient woodland. So you've got view across the south of field 1 and north across field 2. Again, as you all know, these are a series of fields, quite rural in terms of character and appearance. Here are some further images, views from fields B and C, and north across field E, which is the one towards the A12 in the very southwestern corner. And you can kind of get an idea of site topography too, all the fields sloping down towards the A12. The following slides are a series of visuals that have been submitted as part of a landscape and visual appraisal. So on the top right of each of the following few slides is the viewpoint location where the photograph was taken, and the splays going outward show the viewing cone or the angle of view for the photograph. So in effect, what I'm going to do is we'll begin in the north, and then we're going to work anti-clockwise around the site where the photos are available. So west, south, east, and then back to north. So this is from public right-of-way Brentwood 105, looking towards the south. And obviously, hopefully you can see the red lines on the screen also denote the extent of the visibility or the extent of where the solar panels will be located in each image. This view is from Hall Lane near Bennett's Farm. That's a Grade 2 listed building looking east. So again, the extent of the solar farm would be within the red lines towards the right-hand side of that image. Probably appropriate time to mention it. I did mention it on the site visit on Saturday. One of the power lines is in view, and just to point out that there was a minor terminology correction to flag in the report. There is one reference to the word pylon within the report, but just to be clear, that should read as overhead power lines. So kind of not dissimilar in scale to and appearance to telegraph poles, and that's what I was outlining, is kind of characterising the surrounding area. Didn't want to mislead members on that point. So this is the view from public right-of-way Brentwood 22, looking east. The site is only partially visible in the background there. This is a view from public right-of-way Brentwood 24, looking southwest. Again, red line denoting the extent of the site in view. And you can see that there's existing screening in this particular image. View from public right-of-way 24 looking north, again with some screening there. This view is from Hall Lane Road Bridge, which members will recall we stood at on Saturday, overlooking the A12 towards the northwest of the site. The view from junction of public right-of-way 87 and Hall Lane looking southeast. Again, members will recall this is roughly where we stood on Saturday. This is a view from Hall Lane looking towards the south, and members should note that there would be hedgerow planting along this roadside following revisions to the application. So this is view from public right-of-way N87 looking east. We drove through this particular part of the site on Saturday. This is a view from public right-of-way Mount Nessing 1 looking towards the west, so the site is kind of in the distance, again screened by quite a bit of vegetation. A view from public right-of-way Brentwood 91 looking southwest, and there will be planting along the width of the site in this image. So the next couple of slides are going to comprise some CGIs of planting which is proposed for the visual screening. And what it's doing is it's comparing year 1 versus year 15, illustrating the visual effect will reduce over time as the hedgerow planting matures. So year 1 is at the top, year 15 at the bottom. This is roughly where we stood again on Saturday. This is just another image illustrating that the hedgerow will be planted so that the top of the solar panels will be screened. It might be difficult to see on image on this screen. I do apologise. It's just to illustrate that you've got solar farms in the very background part of the image, right at the top, and again that will be screened by planting. And this view is taken from Bennett's farm along Hall Lane. And just to re-emphasise that there will be planting along Hall Lane for the entirety of it, as it to screen the solar farm that is proposed. That was a revision that was requested during the lifetime of the application, and the Highway Authority have not raised an objection based on the setback of the planting from the highway boundary, which is a minimum of 3 metres. The planting, just for the avoidance of doubt, is to be located on the outside edge of the fence. Okay, 91 representations have been received on this application, the majority of which are objecting. The principal issues raised, i.e. the material planning considerations, as summarised by officers, are highlighted in the bottom left corner of this screen, and I'll cover these each in turn shortly. Some general comments have also been received, and they're primarily comprising requests for clarification or observation rather than expressing support, i.e. could the extent of the farm be reduced in size, or reassurance that it wouldn't be redeveloped for housing, clarification regarding the grid connection, etc. And obviously those issues are dealt with within the report. In terms of consultees, there are no technical objections remaining from any statutory consultee. There have been objections from some, including Doddinghurst and Mount Nessing parish councils. The condition schedule is quite long, members would have seen that, and obviously that the intent is to secure mitigation where harm has been identified, but obviously that harm all has to be weighed in the planning balance. Members should be aware that we have received a late petition. It does not meet the threshold, i.e. 750 locals, for it to be reported directly to Ordinary Council or to treat it as a separate agenda item. The contents of the petition are on screen in italics. In summary, it echoes the principal matters within the previous slide. Just from my own observation, it is noted that there are some signatories who have already made direct representations to the council on the application. As part of the submission that was made to us, it also included a resident survey or a summary of a resident survey, but the individual responses weren't provided as part of that, so we don't have the capability of independently verifying the methodology, the selection of respondents, or their geographical distribution. The substantive concerns have already been highlighted and they've been considered and addressed within the report. And that report obviously provides an assessment by officers informed by technical evidence and consultation with the relevant specialist bodies. So, Greenbelt and Grainbelt. So firstly, I draw members' attention to 6.61 of the report, which is the beginning of the Greenbelt section, and the next couple of slides will cover Greenbelt and Greybelt as best as I possibly can. One of the principal issues to consider is whether the site is an area of Greybelt. The site is located within the Greenbelt. If this development were to be permitted, it would remain within the Greenbelt. The boundaries of the Greenbelt are not amended by approving schemes within the Greenbelt where a Greybelt exception is relied upon. So Greybelt is essentially introducing an alternative route for developing areas within the Greenbelt beyond those which members will be aware of listed within paragraph 154. It does not have to involve land which has been previously developed. It can include other areas of land, for example, those with fields and no built form. Greybelt is principally an assessment of the contribution made by the land, but that assessment includes considering whether development creates an incongruous pattern and so on. And the extent and layout of the proposal can be relevant in that kind of assessment. The assessment of whether land constitutes Greybelt is kind of undertaken in stages. Members be aware that I've circulated a Litchfield's document to kind of put that into a flowchart, and hopefully that has assisted in your review of the submission. Decision makers need to consider how land performs against specified Greenbelt purposes, and these are summarised on the screen at A, B and D towards the bottom. And then we consider whether there are any protected constraints, i.e. those listed within footnote 7, and to whether they provide a strong reason to refuse or restrict the proposal. So officers have concluded that the land does not strongly contribute to any of the three purposes identified in the first three considerations on the screen. And within the report, you would see that it takes the planning practice guidance as kind of a baseline to help inform our assessment. So the proposal is extensive and it does introduce infrastructure across the countryside, but it is not an outward continuation of the settlement. It's functionally and visually distinct from the built-up area. The A12 provides a physical separation. It's temporary and removable, and the distinction is the proposal spreads infrastructure across the countryside, but it does not represent the large built-up area spreading outwards. The proposal does not, by virtue of its overall scale, result in a merging of towns. Just for the avoidance of doubt, villages are excluded from this definition. Further, the distance and existence of post-war development dilutes any historical aspect from the main town of Brentwood. So we've also concluded, following technical consultees submitting their comments on the scheme, that there are no protected constraints to provide a strong reason to either refuse or restrict the specific proposal before us. Case law is quite clear that when we're considering this particular aspect, we consider the scheme in question and not development more broadly. So on that basis, going through this criteria, officers conclude that the criteria is met and the site can be described as Greybelt. So having considered that the land falls within the Greybelt definition, the exception to inappropriate development within paragraph 155 is then considered. That concerns the development of new homes, commercial development and other development, and it needs to meet some criteria A through D, albeit D is only relating to schemes that involve housing, which isn't the case here. So really we're just looking at A through C in this case. So officers have identified there is no fundamental undermining of the purposes taken together of the remaining Greenbelt. There is going to be encroachment of the countryside, but the overall scale of renewable energy within the borough, coupled with the fact this is a temporary use of land in planning terms, means the scheme does not fundamentally undermine the purposes of the Greenbelt, in our professional opinion. We've concluded that there is a demonstrable unmet need based on national planning policy and the position on renewable energy, as set out within the report in detail. We also conclude that the scheme would, based on the specific development proposed, be within a sustainable location. And as I've mentioned, the golden rules are not applicable in this particular case. So therefore, the proposal is not considered to be inappropriate development within the Greenbelt, and it is not necessary for there to be very special circumstances demonstrated or to undertake a separate assessment on the effects of development upon the openness of the Greenbelt in accordance with the framework. But ultimately, the site is going to remain within the Greenbelt, and we still need to consider all of the other planning effects, and that all has to be weighed in the planning balance. So I'll go on to talk about the other principal issues that have been raised. So in terms of landscape and visual impacts, that's covered from 6.131 of the report. The site currently comprises a series of fields as discussed. So the landscape has been identified by the Council's Landscape and Ecology Advisor to comprise attractive features, including woodland blocks, mature hedgerows, and established vegetation. However, the consultee acknowledges that it is not a landscape of particularly high sensitivity or value. So the solar arrays and the associated infrastructure, they'd be relatively low in height, and together with the existing features that I just described, officers conclude this substantially limits views into the site from the surrounding public right-of-way network and other public viewpoints. Most effects would principally be from the locations immediately adjoining the site, such as Hall Lane and some of the public right-of-way network. As 6.142 of the report, it is identified that there would be some moderate to major adverse visual effects along sections of the public right-of-way network in the early years of operation as the mitigation planting matures, and we saw some CGIs about that. This is together with planting to be strengthened along existing boundaries within the application site, and that planting will be managed as part of the conditions, including the need for replacements where necessary. So the effects of development must be considered having regard to the extent, duration, reversibility, and the wider planning context. So for example, this proposal is for a temporary period in planning terms, and the effects are therefore temporary, and that limits the effect of development as a whole. The development will be removed at the expiry of the permission, and so ultimately, whilst harm is identified, those effects are accepted and will reduce over time as planting matures, and therefore we conclude that the proposal would not have an unacceptable effect on landscape character and therefore compliant with the broad aims of policy BE14 more generally. Loss of agricultural land is covered from 6.41 of the report. So, as I said on Saturday, for agricultural land in England, for planning purposes, we grade it from 1 through to 5, 1 being excellent quality, 5 being very poor quality, under the Agricultural Land Classification System, ALC for short. The higher the number, the higher its quality. Grade 3 is split into 2 categories. 3A, which is good quality and therefore still classified as the best and most versatile land, BMV for short, whereas 3B is classed as moderate quality and not BMV. So the report considered this in detail. There are broad national mapping which suggests some of the site may comprise grade 2 or 3 land, but the mapping is at a strategic level and it doesn't consider individual fields. So what the applicant did was submit a site-specific survey, and that concluded that there was no grade 1 or grade 2 land. Approximately 92.4% of the surveyed land was grade 3B, so that's not BMV, best and most versatile. Only 8.3 hectares was graded at 3A, best and most versatile land. So there would be some loss of grade 3A, and the loss of BMV does represent harm as temporary removal from agricultural productions. The question before us is, does the inclusion of this limited area make the proposal unacceptable? Natural England, a statutory consultee, considers that there will be no significant permanent loss of agricultural land quality because it is a temporary development. And therefore, officers have concluded the harm that we attribute to this issue is limited. And that harm ultimately has to be considered in the overall planning balance. Part of this exercise requires the applicant to submit a site selection report, and that considers whether there are any other locations nearby which could, for this development to be housed. So that's considered at 6.59 of the report. Turning to heritage, this is considered in detail from 6.110. In summary, the Council's Heritage Advisor has identified that the development would result in less than substantial harm to the setting of different listed buildings which are in close proximity to the site. So that includes Grade 2 listed Fitzwaters, which we saw on site on Saturday, to the east of the application site, and Grade 2 Bennett's Farmhouse along Hall Lane to the north. They also considered that there would be effects upon the non-designated heritage asset of Fitzwaters Farmhouse, which again we saw on site on Saturday. Members should note that less than substantial harm should be considered on a spectrum, ranging from very low through to moderate and up to very high. And that harm needs to be considered against public benefits that are arising from the scheme. Simply put, if there is a high level of harm identified, then you'd expect a proportionate amount of public benefits arising to overcome that harm for development to be justified. The Heritage Advisor did not consider there would be an adverse effect upon the Grade 2 star listed St Mary Church to the south, and thereby that alleviates the concerns of Historic England, and that's primarily due to the separation distances and topography and existing vegetation that's present. The Heritage Advisor did note that there were public benefits that were arising from this scheme, and officers have considered that there is a low level of harm that is arising in this case, primarily because we have mitigation through the fact that the extent of spread of development has been reduced near to the Grade 2 listed building of Fitzwaters. That's in the very northern parcel, Field A or 1, together with some additional planting which provides that additional landscape mitigation, particularly around Hall Lane. Just to note that archaeological surveys have been undertaken, and that includes targeted trial trench evaluations. Some deposits have been identified, but the advice that we've got from the county archaeologist is that subject to conditions, we can ultimately get round that particular constraint, and there would be no adverse effects. So in terms of residential amenity, this is covered from 6.151 of the report. So Keeper's Cottage is kind of quite close to Field B or Field 2, but the distance from the building to the nearest fence surrounding the solar array is calculated to be in excess of 90 metres. That property, as members would have noted on site, is already well screened by existing trees and vegetations. Otherwise, properties are generally well in excess of 100 or maybe even nearly 200 metres, depending on exactly where they are, from the nearest edge of the application site. So we recognise that there will be views that change, but those separation distances are quite significant, and ultimately we've concluded there would be no material loss of outlook arising from this scheme. In terms of noise aspects, the Environmental Health Officer has determined the noise assessment would result in a low impact, and this will primarily be in the compound areas, which members will recall are quite far away from residential properties. They're kind of located next to the A12. So overall, the technical advice that we have is that there are no unacceptable effects. In terms of construction traffic, the construction period will be temporary and can be mitigated through condition, and I'll expand on that in a second. But in terms of other construction effects like dust, this would also be mitigated through condition, the standard construction environmental management plan. Highway safety and construction traffic, this is considered from 6.229 of the report. So we have technical input from both Essex Highways and National Highways, and they conclude that there would be no adverse effects on highway safety, capacity or efficiency. As set out, the primary access is taken from Roman Road, and the greatest traffic impacts are going to be those during construction. The transport assessment that's been submitted estimates only 3 HGV visits will be required on an average working day, but those numbers will vary dependent on the stage of construction. In effect, they calculate that there'll be approximately 750 return HGV visits through the construction period, together with some other vehicle movements from typical cars and vans. But predominantly, there will be quite a limited number of heavy goods vehicles travelling to the site as part of the construction phase. So conditions include construction traffic management plan, which will provide that mechanism to control construction vehicle movements, delivery management, parking arrangement, wheel washing facility, the provision of banksmen at the key intersections, and there will also be a need for site signage to be installed so that we're protecting public rights of way. But as I said, the technical consultees raise no objections to this scheme. 6.248 of the report covers fire. In terms of fire risk, we've consulted the Essex County Fire Rescue Services and a specific team as part of that, the Future Infrastructure Risk Team, and they typically review large-scale solar projects such as this. So the developer has submitted several documents in relation to fire safety during the lifetime of the application. That includes an outlined battery safety management plan and a fire water management plan. And those documents contain information on the approach to water supplies, containment measures, contingency arrangements, among other criteria. The consultees have drawn attention to some operational guidance relating to emergency access and the need for firefighting infrastructure, but they have not identified any specific deficiencies in the submission, and they have not raised an objection. We've recommended detailed planning conditions to limit the potential for any fire, but in the unlikely event a fire would occur, there are means for early detection, alarm suppression, isolation, with shutdown procedures, and the firefighting infrastructure required, including water supplies and hydrants, which will be secured through the conditions. Finally, turning to ecology, which starts at 6.186 of the report, there are no technical objections from consultees, including Natural England and the Council's own Landscape and Ecology Consultee. The site currently comprises limited ecological value on the basis it is predominantly an intensively managed farmland. Ecological surveys have identified there are habitats capable of supporting a range of species, but the Council's ecologist advises biodiversity measures would result in a significant increase in the overall ecological value of the site. That could be through the provision of wildflower habitats, hedgerows, bird boxes, and long-term maintenance of the ecological buffers. The standard mitigation practices will be observed in accordance with the ecological documents that accompany the submission. They'll be secured through condition, and that includes in relation to skylarks, where potential nesting habitats as existing may be displaced, and they are to be located on the adjoining agricultural land, which is within the applicant's control. In biodiversity net gain terms, the submitted metric originally calculated the proposal significantly exceeded the statutory minimum of 10%, with on-site gains of 137.52% in habitat units, 68.21 in hedgerow units, and 23.15 increase in watercourse units. But just to point out that this was prior to the provision of additional planting along Hall Lane and within the fields, so that those figures would be boosted. And that does represent a benefit of the proposal, which does need to be weighed in the planning balance. The arboricultural reports confirm that no trees or hedgerows are required to be removed to facilitate the new planting. There will be buffer zones provided near the ancient woodland in excess of 15-metre requirements. And all that planting and the reports, etc., are to be secured through condition. So overall, we consider that the effect on the natural environment would be compliant with our policy objectives, and positive weight can be attributed to the gains which exceed the legal minimum. During the site visit, we discussed whether there is potential for sheep grazing, and that has not been suggested within the submission. Grazing is one way of obviously managing grassland beneath the panels, but were this to occur, it cannot compromise the habitats and biodiversity gains that are being relied upon. Development has to be carried out in accordance with the Habitat Management Monitoring Plan, and that is to be conditioned. A concern was also raised regarding deer roaming around the fields. So the fencing proposed will change movement patterns, but it does not fence off the entire countryside. There will still be unfenced corridors along all parts of the site where fencing is to be set back from the boundary edges. So that would continue to provide routes in and around the site for any wildlife. And there is no evidence to demonstrate that deers would be funnelled onto the highway as a consequence. Officers are recommending a couple of additional conditions. Whilst the approved plans control the layout and dimensions of the infrastructure, they do not all specify the external colours and finishes. Whilst we're typically expecting those to blend in with the local environment, and, darker colours, green for example, there may be instances where the colour scheme may need to differ if that may assist, for example, in kind of reducing overheating risks, and a lighter colour may be more appropriate. So this condition ultimately provides us control to ensure that the external finishes are appropriate to local context. Officers are recommending a further condition following a discussion on site, which is to do with notifying the LPA of when the developer commences the permission, and that is primarily linked to the next condition. This condition essentially requires that if no electricity has been exported from the development to the electricity distribution network within 2 years, mindful that construction is meant to be between 9 to 12 months, the developer will need to restore the site back to its previous condition in accordance with an approved decommissioning scheme. I haven't included the full detail on the slide just to highlight that it would be that of those listed in conditions 5 and 6 in terms of it will mirror it. So the 24-month period provides that flexibility for the developer in terms of the construction period, and ultimately, the applicant could make an application to the authority to amend that, but that would be subject to a formal application. But really the intent of this condition is to ensure that if the developer commences, it doesn't result in a partially completed or redundant infrastructure being there indefinitely, and ultimately that it will be removed from the site. In effect, closing a loophole, I suppose. So we're nearly there. Planning balance. This slide brings together the planning balance, which I've simplified from an earlier draft that I've sent to members. The benefits are contained on the left hand side of the screen, and the harms are located on the right. So decisions are not made by counting the number of benefits and the number of harms. Rather, we must consider the significance of each matter and the weight that should be reasonably be attributed to it. So the weight that has been attributed to it is that of officers. Just to point out, with regards to heritage harm, great weight should be given to the conservation of heritage assets, but the identified harm is at the lower end of the less than substantial harm spectrum, and therefore that limits the overall effects, hence the weighting that has been suggested. So having undertaken that balance, we conclude that the harms are substantially outweighed by the public benefits, and this weighs significantly in favour of granting permission. For the avoidance of doubt, this is not a marginal or finely balanced recommendation from officers. So to conclude, this is a temporary planning permission for up to 40 years of operation. It is a temporary use of land before reverting to former agricultural use. There would be a significant positive contribution towards national energy security. The proposal does not represent inappropriate development with the Greenbelt. The site would remain a Greenbelt. Existing public rights of way remain open, and a new permissive footpath is to be secured. Landscape and visual impacts have been identified, but they are localised, and the adverse effects will reduce over time as the planting establishes. There is limited harm to designated heritage assets and harm to a non-designated heritage asset. We've received no technical objections there are no technical objections outstanding from any of the consultees, and ultimately, where issues have been identified, we consider they can be secured through condition. So the harm identified is considered to be clearly outweighed by public benefits, and this isn't an unbalanced decision. Therefore, the recommendation is to approve the application subject to the conditions that are set out within the report and the 3 additional conditions that have been listed in the presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Cook, for that very detailed and I think helpful verbal presentation to go with the very detailed report that we've got. I'm just going to say we've got several people who want and need to speak, and just so that the applicant doesn't get concerned about this, I'm going to give the applicant the opportunity to speak after several other people, because I think the other people are largely going to be critical, so at least then the applicant's got the opportunity to hear what's already been said. So first of all, we're going to go to the objector, Ms. Stones.
Good evening, I'm Deborah Stones and I've lived on Fitzwaters Farm Estate for over 30 years. I believe I represent the majority view of the local community who access and enjoy this area of Greenbelt. I'm not going to repeat the issues and concerns that have probably been raised in other documentation, including fire risks, traffic problems and dubious labour practices involved in the manufacturing of solar panels. Suffice to say that they are serious issues which I'm sure will be given due consideration by the committee. The area subject of this proposal has been described by Luminous Energy as low-grade agricultural land of no great loss to farming or the local community, and this development would only have minimal impact on the site's biodiversity. Neither could be further from the truth. This is Greenbelt, good quality productive farmland, which encompasses ancient woodland, waterways, the River Wid, together with fishing and boating lakes. The area supports footpaths well used by the local community and is a home to an abundant range of wildlife, including, but not limited to, 3 species of deer, badgers, bats, birds of prey, skylarks and owls. Latest surveys also identified that medieval and Roman settlements and associated remains are present in the fields off Hall Lane. The scale and nature of this proposed development will inevitably destroy or harm these species and cannot be effectively minimalised or managed by the promise to install a few hedges and birds and bat boxes. There is an assertion that this area of Greenbelt may also be able to be downgraded to grey. This would leave any Greenbelt in the locality vulnerable to the same reclassification and open to future development. This site is good productive farmland and should not be taken out of agricultural production. Once farmland is gone, it's gone forever, and in all likelihood will be rendered suitable for development after the 40 years have expired. During my time here, I have observed horse riders, joggers, walkers and cyclists making full use of the public access. The lakes are used by fishermen and model boat clubs alike, the woods have been used for forest schools and the local brownie packs, while Scouts and Duke of Edinburgh participants navigate the area on orienteering weekends. During COVID, this green space was a lifeline to those seeking safe outdoor exercise and activity. Whilst it is not acknowledged that the footpaths will be retained, the blot on the landscape of these panels, together with the accompanying infrastructure, CCTV and fencing, will destroy the whole experience and enjoyment of nature and countryside. Luminous Energy asserts in their application that no suitable brown sites exist within Basildon or Brentwood areas for their purpose. Their website, however, states, and I quote, "Brownfield sites involve site clearance and remediation, which increases costs and extends construction timelines, which make the site uninvestable, so it comes down to profit margins." The council planning site has some 81 objections for these plans. None of these objectors appear to be against solar panels or net zero in the right place. As well as the 81 objections, there is an online petition which has recorded over 1,300 signatures opposing these plans in this location. In closing, 40 years is in no way temporary. However, the loss of wildlife, habitat and countryside will be permanent if this is allowed to go ahead. I respectfully request that this application be refused. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Right, so the next person to speak, Councillor Kirsty Dale from Mount Nessing.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so Chair of Mount Nessing Village Council and as a legal consultee, we are objecting to this application on the following counts. So it is within Greenbelt. The application is within prime farming land. The construction of its road and traffic use will significantly impact residents given the other amount of large developments planned for the area. Some in the recent LDP, some not, but which may qualify under the modifications to the MPPF of December 2024 Greyland. The crossings on the private road across the River Wid and the road itself will need to be widened and upgraded. The crossing and pavement across Hall Lane and Hall Lane itself will need significant repair and upgrading. On no account should any traffic be allowed through St Mary's Primary School on Hall Lane in Shenfield. There is an S-bend that is extremely tight and is already prone to accidents. The St Anne's Road, Lower Road and Widvale Road, which we understood was planned for the electrical connection route to the Hutton National Grid connection, would require significant works. Question would be how the two-way traffic would be maintained, and I understand that it wasn't part of this application and that it would be a separate application. However, if this was then approved and then that was to be put in as a separate application, we'd have some serious concerns. Also, with that, there's the under the A12 railway bridges, which is already a tight fit. The wildlife and environmental concerns and the effect that will have during construction, which we believe will be a significant impact. We've noted around the noise, the general pollution, but also the disruption to the homes, the offices and storage facilities. And we do note that there is an explosive storage facility at Fitzwalters, which must have access maintained at all times. We believe it would set a precedent for further solar constructions alongside the one that we've already had permitted at Old Church Road in Mount Nessing. The Call for Sites plan did identify a number of sites around Mount Nessing which could fall into solar development, if this were passed. Therefore, we oppose the application. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Right. So I'm going to go to, just for clarity here, Councillor Barber, are you going to be interested in speaking or are you just present? I'm not planning to speak. Right, okay. So I'm going to go to Councillor Nicholson. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. For full disclosure, I am a ward resident and the lead on the petition and survey that was started out of concerns that resident objections were being ignored. Laying aside my views and my party's view about net zero, this isn't an argument about renewable energy. It's about whether it's the right development in the right place at the right scale. And the recommendation before you depends on a number of planning judgments. The first is the grey belt assessment. The recommendation to approve this application relies on this site being treated as grey belt rather than green belt, which requires very special circumstances. Yet the officer's own assessment concludes that the site does make a moderate contribution to preventing unrestricted sprawl. So in my mind, that's not a clear-cut finding, making it grey belt. If members take a different view, the basis of the recommendation changes. So I would urge you to look carefully at that conclusion. Secondly, I ask you to consider the cumulative impact. This proposal adds to the growing amount of energy infrastructure being approved on Greenbelt land in Brentwood. Residents experience another stretch of open countryside changing, another piece of rural landscape being lost, another development added to those already improved. It's a cumulative effect that concerns residents. If the Greenbelt definition as we know it cannot be protected, where and when does this stop? Thirdly, I ask you to consider whether the alternatives have really been tested. Prioritising brownfield came up in my survey as an important consideration to residents. My understanding is that the applicant has limited its searches to sites within 2.5 kilometres of the substation. That's their chosen parameter, not a planning requirement as I understand it. Are members satisfied that the least harmful location has genuinely been demonstrated? Fire safety is another concern many have raised, bearing in mind that in February last year, a fire broke out in a BESS storage site right here in Essex. The presentation says that fire risks can be addressed by conditions, but conditions cannot eliminate the consequences of a battery fire. It's not disproportionate to ask for fire, water provision, emergency access and response arrangements for this site to be tested against that real Essex incident, not just against hypothetical guidance. This proposal would occupy agricultural land for 40 years. 40 years is not a short temporary interruption, it's generational. Although the land may be eventually restored, many of today's residents will never see that restoration. Again, the long-term impact, I don't believe, and my residents don't believe around me, that it's not been given sufficient weight. Residents have also concerns about ecology, protected wildlife like the red-listed skylarks, long-term arrangements for decommissioning and restoring the site. These are matters that deserve careful scrutiny because they will affect this landscape for decades. Although officers may count this as not being of material consideration, this application takes from the Greenbelt and residents, harming food security and protected wildlife while giving nothing to Brentwood in return. Its potential benefits are funnelled almost entirely elsewhere. With all this in mind and on behalf of local residents, I respectfully ask you to refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nicholson. Right, I've now got there's a couple of councillors who couldn't be here tonight, so I'm going to read out a couple of things, not in sequence, but I've got some words from Councillor Darrell Sankey, who says the following. I should state that I am in favour of green energy. It is quite obvious that the move away from fossil fuels is urgent. The use of natural sources of energy against the unsustainable and polluting fossil fuels is simply common sense. I believe that the majority of residents would prefer a partially hidden solar farm to wind turbines and or monstrous pylons blighting the landscape. That said, the proposed Fitzwalters Farm solar field does raise issues that the committee should consider. Loss of green belt, loss of agricultural land, damage to wildlife habitat, damage to ecosystems, precedent for future solar farms locally with impact as detailed previously, impact on local highways and residents with construction traffic, specifically near local schools, disruption locally, specifically noise and pollution, explosive and fire risk at storage facility relating to the battery energy storage system, impact on conservation and environment, impact on protecting and enhancing the natural environment, impact on trees, woodland, hedgerows. Planning permission is granted subject to 41 conditions, and obviously we've just had a few extra ones, which indicates the marginality and questionable substance of the decision. Post-consultation, there is little doubt that residents are not in favour of the proposal, and with the issues identified above, due weight should be given to that fact. And that's Councillor Sankey. Right. So, I'm now going to go to Mr. Bryson from Luminous Energy, and obviously you've had the opportunity to hear all of what's come before.
Good evening, councillors. My name is David Bryson. I'm a founding director of Luminous Energy, a company we set up 13 years ago to tackle climate change. Thank you for the chance to speak in support of our proposal. Your officers recommend that you grant permission, and they don't reach that alone. Every statutory consultee that examined this scheme raised no objection, subject to conditions. Among them, the Environment Agency, Natural England, National Essex Highways, the lead local flood authority, and the Fire Service. The Council's own Landscape and Ecology Advisor finds the landscape effects limited and the ecological gains significant. I'd ask you to give real weight to that combined expert judgment. Let me explain why we chose this site. Viable grid connections are now among the hardest things to find in this country. When we identified available capacity at Shenfield, that was the opportunity. And we then looked for nearby land with the fewest environmental constraints, not best and most versatile, and a willing landowner. Siting this scheme alongside existing infrastructure, the A12, was the logical choice for a project of this kind. I won't pretend there is no impact, but I'd ask you to weigh it against what your own officers have already concluded on the need for this scheme, on whether it sits in a sustainable location, and on the Greenbelt itself. Their finding is the same each time. In their own words, a reason for refusal could not be substantiated. The one heritage harm they identify sits at the very lowest end of less than substantial. We've designed it to respect residents, landscape and ecology. After talking to nearby residents and consultees, we removed 51 acres of panels from our original layout and built in setbacks from trees and sensitive areas. It gives back to nature. Acres of new wildflower meadow and around a mile of new hedgerow deliver a biodiversity net gain of over 137%, more than 13 times the legal minimum. It is also temporary and reversible. The permission runs for 40 years, after which everything is removed and the land fully restored. In the meantime, sheep can graze beneath the panels, keeping the land in agricultural use. The need is real. The government's Clean Power Action Plan targets 7 gigawatts of solar in the southeast of England by 2035. At the end of 2025, only 3.5 gigawatts were built or in the planning system, which demonstrates a 50% shortfall. A major constraint on getting there is precisely the grid capacity this site can use. This scheme would generate 63,000 megawatt hours of power, enough for roughly 3/4 of the households in the Brentwood borough, with no operational emissions and no air or water pollution. The application was drawn on local feeling, and we don't dismiss it, but the question before you was a planning question, and on that your officers are clear. The site meets the NPPF definition of grey belt, so this is not inappropriate development. Even were members to take a different view, officers conclude the public benefits clearly outweigh the green belt harm. £25,000 will be set aside each year for the local community. Your officers have set out the evidence for all this very fully in their report, and I respectfully urge the committee to support that recommendation and approve the application. Thank you.
Thank you. Just writing something down there. Okay. Right, so that's, as far as I'm aware, that's all of the non-committee people to speak. We've obviously now got, yes, I'm aware of Councillor Gordon, and I'll come to you in just a sec. You're obviously a ward councillor. I'm going to read out there's a statement from Councillor Worsfold, who's not here, so I'll read that out, and then we'll go to Councillor Gordon, of the two ward councillors. So, Councillor Worsfold's statement is a bit long, but most of us accept the need for cleaner, greener, cheaper renewable energy. The dependence on fossil fuels has caused irreparable damage to our climate and forced up energy bills for households and businesses. The big challenge is delivering that transition, and this solar farm plan is part of that challenge. The committee has a difficult challenge, and I know all members will be very diligent in their review of the application. There are a lot of objections, but many of them are not on planning grounds. It has its merits, but it also has its faults. We have to be very cautious about releasing agricultural land for development, even one that allows for its former use to be restored some decades ahead. Offsetting that concern, it is the fact that the landowner and farmer no longer wants to use this land for agricultural purposes. There is a chicken and egg factor hidden in this application, as there is no certainty that it will be connected to the grid or how that will be done. Surely that needs clarification and certainty before approving this application. I'm not keen on taking such things for granted, however optimistic the developers might be. I share the concerns of many of the objectors about the potential fire risks. With hotter, drier summers now set to be the norm, we are seeing the consequences of the heightened wildfire risk around the country on the news almost every night. I believe we need to take a step back and have a thorough reassessment of this risk across the whole site, including how it will be contained should the worst happen. I do not believe the current risk assessment takes account of the changes in climate that we are experiencing, rather ironic given that we are talking about a solar farm. I have major objections to the woefully inadequate screening on the installation. As someone who frequently walks the footpaths through the site, I do not want to wait 15 years for new shrubs and hedgerows to grow before the panels are effectively hidden. That developers should be planting and maintaining a mature hedgerow that hides the panels from day one. We also need effective screening upon the whole length of Hall Lane where the installation will be visible from the road. The proposed planting does not provide enough screening. I have raised this with the developers and been told that Essex Highways objected to the suggestion that natural screening could be planted alongside the exposed part of the installation. The reason given was the potential reduced visibility around one of the bends where there is no significant hedgerow at present. I wonder if they've ever driven along Hall Lane in the spring and summer. There are 3 sharp bends in quick succession. 2 of these are almost completely blind from both directions. Does some additional hedgerow on the 3rd bend really make the road more dangerous? I think there is a decent argument for saying it would make that stretch less dangerous because the visibility would be consistent along that whole stretch and there would be no temptation for most drivers to accelerate just because they can see across one corner. These points about adequate planting and screening are not minor quibbles. They are important points which need to be addressed if you are to approve this application because they will further significantly mitigate its visual impact. As I cannot predict the direction the debate on the application will take, I ask that if you are minded to accept the officer's recommendations to approve it, that you take these concerns into account. That's Councillor Worsfold. Right, now, Councillor Gordon.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just start off by saying I'm a big supporter of solar panels on domestic roofs. I installed the system 18 months ago, and financially it's one of the best decisions I ever made. However, I also enjoy my food, and alas, my food roof space isn't conducive to growing crops. Now, because of the UK's relatively dark, cloudy and northerly position, a recent World Bank study ranks Britain second from the bottom in the world for practical solar potential, just above Ireland, apparently. Conversely, our mild climate and plentiful rain makes us exceptionally good at growing grass and crops. Therefore, we are taking land that nature has optimised for food production and using it to harvest something much harder. Looking at the National Grid data for the UK, solar generated 16% of the UK's electricity in the past week. However, over 12 months, that figure falls to a mere 7%, and certainly in December, it's less than 2%. Therefore, solar farms are clearly not the answer to Britain's electricity issues. The proposed site consists of valuable, productive agricultural land. National Planning Policy Framework guidelines expect developments to be directed towards brownfield or lower quality land and encourage and to maintain food production. The loss of productive farmland to industrial infrastructure threatens food security and represents a poor use of our natural resources. Britain already imports 45% of our food. Schemes like this will see that figure grow. Our farms and farmers operate at the highest standards in the world. Are the supporters of this scheme really confident that the additional imports we'll have to import will be produced in an ethical way? On the landscape, the proposed development will drastically alter the rural character and beauty of our countryside. The introduction of large swathes of industrial metal, fencing and CCTV cameras will destroy the area. I'm also concerned about the flood risk assessment on page 72 does not adequately address how surface runoffs will be managed. Furthermore, there are insufficient details regarding preservation of local wildlife habitats. The fire risk, which has already been touched on, following a number of fires last year, Suffolk's Deputy Chief Fire Officer raised concerns about battery storage. When batteries overcharge, they can produce a chemical reaction which produce large volumes of explosive and toxic gas and fire. These can burn for days. So the question is, does Essex Fire Protection have the equipment to put these fires out? A large number of residents live very close to this proposed site and would have their health impacted by such a fire. The construction phase will cause significant and unacceptable disruption to local community. The influx of HGVs on a very narrow rural lanes will create severe traffic hazards, noise and general disturbance to residents. In terms of generally on renewables, we're told renewables are now cheaper. However, most submissions only focus on the marginal cost of renewable or wholesale prices and totally ignore the cost of subsidies, grid balancing, backup and extension of the grid to accommodate wind and solar farms. We're also told that Britain is now a leader in renewables. Based on the latest data, that probably explains why we're paying the highest industrial electricity prices amongst the 24 members of the International Energy Agency. Given these adverse impacts, which are not outweighed by the proposed benefits, I strongly urge the Planning Committee to protect the Green Belt, I'll say that again, the Green Belt, and refuse this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Right. That now means that everybody who isn't on the Planning Committee has had an opportunity to speak. Councillor Nicky Cuthbert couldn't be here, unfortunately. So we've got Councillor McShane wants to speak.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to say I can't blame farmers for doing this sort of project because it gives them a steady income as opposed to probably a loss in a drought year like this. There's a lot of mention about energy security and nothing about food security. This country used to produce about 80% of its food at one time. It's now down to between 60–65%, and that is rapidly declining with developments like this, housing on the green belt, biodiversity things, railways, roads, you name it. And it won't be long before that, that will probably be down about 40% in the next, by the time this thing at 40 years, it would be well down. Just a couple of things, food security is very important, I think. We've only got to look at when the Ukraine was invaded by Russia, the price of wheat and commodities nearly doubled in a matter of weeks. which I think is significant. And nobody ever talks about, oh yes, well, we can import it, but we may not be able to import it. There's a few other things. As a personal experience, I've got a couple of hundred solar panels on roofs. Very good this time of year, but absolutely awful in the winter time. Hardly anything. On a cloudy day, they don't produce anything. And also, we have to remember, these solar panels are all being imported from China. Not exactly very environmentally friendly, halfway around the world, and we don't know what their manufacturing methods are like there. I do know there is climate change and so on, and this is why I think we have to think more and more about food security in the next few years. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McShane. Councillor Parker. Sorry, just before Councillor Parker speaks, just want to correct, you did say there was nothing about food security in the report. There is something about food security in the report. It is covered.
The emphasis is always on energy security, not food. We do need food. It's one of the essentials of life.
You did say there was nothing about food security in the report, and it is covered. Mr. Cook has covered it. Councillor Parker.
Yes, before I speak, Chair, could I propose this application for refusal?
You have a second. Councillor McShane.
Please speak on it now. Thank you, Chair. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the officers in their attempt to make this application acceptable in trying to clarify grey belt versus green belt. I would suggest members refer to page 42, 6.64 to 6.67, which describes green belt and grey belt. The description given on page 42 does not represent these fields or the farmland that we are talking about. However, this application is viewed by the residents and parish councils and myself as completely unacceptable. My colleague, the Ward Councillor for Shenfield, Thomas Gordon, has given a very detailed and technical reason why this application should not go ahead. For my part, I will concentrate on the visual and farming reasons why I think, in this instance, changing greenbelt land into grey belt is a disaster. This scheme looks to take away 230 acres of farmland, not unworked land, but currently in full food production. On our site visit, all the fields were either ready to be harvested or had already been done. The vastness of this project cannot be overstated. On Saturday, no matter what field you stood in, you could not see the boundary of this development. As far as the eye could see, it went into the distance. No matter how the applicant and the planners try to dress this up, it will be an eyesore. Plus, the laughable statement that this is a temporary approval, I believe most sensible people would view temporary as 5 to 7 years. No, temporary in this instance is 40 years. To take this farmland out of the food chain is criminal. This land and the surrounding farmland areas have been farmed for well over 150 years. In this day and age of food shortages and high cost of putting food on household tables, this is not the right thing to do, both morally and visually. This should be regarded as a criminal act, desecrating our countryside on a whim that I believe in a few years will be outdated. The officer's report is very detailed. Pages 1 to 98 gives all the reasons why this panel should give permission. They leave the options that this committee could make to the last pages, 109. The members of this committee have a duty on behalf of the Borough Council and its residents to protect our green belt and farming heritage. I ask all members to support a vote of refusal.
Thank you, Councillor Parker, but you're moving a motion for approval. I haven't heard in... Sorry, yes, didn't mean to try and confuse things. Refusal. I didn't hear anything in what you've just said which actually gives a planning argument countering the planning arguments which are being made in the report. So do you have planning arguments which counter the reasons in favour of this development which are being made in the report?
Yes, Chair, I think I said it in the report. I don't believe the description of Greybelt on page 42 is a good description of the land that is being put forward. I think, as my colleague said, the green belt and the farmland is more beneficial for food production, and visually, I think it will be really detrimental to that part of the countryside. I think that, and as I say, it is greenbelt land, and I don't think the descriptive use of the terms in the documents are describing the land that is being put up for application. It is prime farmland. It is not scrubland.
So Mr. Cook has very kindly provided us in Appendix 1 on page 109, which you just referred to, with guidance where members reach a different conclusion on the grey belt to the report. So could you just highlight for us which of the paragraph sections there you are picking on, which
Sorry, Chair,
mean
when
that
I
you
took
take
it
a different view?
Off the screen, I think the numbers have changed, but I think I said 109. Originally, I think it was 101.
109 is where the appendix is.
Yeah.
I'm just asking you, there's various paragraph numbers there, so could you just highlight for us at least which paragraph it is where your opinion diverges from what the officer report is saying?
Can I just, while he's looking for it, I have to remember, we have lost well over 1,000 acres in the last few years to development like this, housing, everything else. And I think if you put up and down the country, I'm talking about in just this borough, we've lost over 1,000 acres. If you go up and down the country, that amounts to an awful lot of land.
Councillor Parker, do you have an answer?
Yes, I think what I've said already, that the site makes a strong contribution to one or more of green belt purposes. That is a fact, and the description, though I don't see it here, where officers have concluded the land constitutes grey belt, and that paragraph 1 is engaged. That doesn't describe the land as grey belt. It's, in my opinion, it is green belt. It's being used for what it should be used, which is farming, and I can't see that the grey belt description warrants to be used on this land. Sorry.
So there are three, if you're talking about paragraph 8.4, and you're claiming that the site makes a strong contribution to one or more of the greenbelt purposes, there are three different headings there, A, B or D. So which of those headings under which do you think it... Page 84, which is we've just been talking about, sorry, paragraph 84, page 109. You've just said you think the site makes a strong contribution to one or more of the greenbelt purposes. That would be under A, B or D. So which one of those is it?
And if it helps, A, B and D are on page 43. It might be useful if Mr. Cook might perhaps helped you through page 109 and then page 43, so you can be clear what exactly are the reasons.
There is other development potential. It recognises that not all greenbelt land performs equally. Some areas contribute strongly to openness and preventing urban sprawl, while others have already been significantly altered or can enable change without unacceptable impacts on the wider greenbelt. It's not a description of this land. This land is prime greenbelt and prime farmland.
Thank you, Chair. So the Greenbelt purposes, the key ones that we need to be looking at are listed in 6.74 of the report, and that refers to purposes A, B and D. So the first purpose, A, is to check the unrestricted sprawl of large built-up areas. The second purpose, purpose B, is to prevent neighbouring towns merging into one another. And the third purpose, purpose D, is to preserve the setting and special character of historic towns. And then if members would then go on to 6.76, the officer assessment is at this point as to why it's considered that none of those purposes are strongly contributed to. So the test for members would be that you're setting out that there is a strong contribution to one of those purposes that I've just read aloud, and setting out, having a look at the illustrative features, the PPG guidance, why you think that it meets that particular test.
I'm sorry, you were describing the whole of the country. And the whole of the country is not going to be covered with solar panels. I go back to what I said. You're trying to describe this land in the wrong context. It is not grey belt. It should not be classed as grey belt because it's prime green belt land and it's prime farmland.
Well, so the officer report, Mr. Bell, do you want to?
Sorry, I was just going to say, if you want to work this through very step by step, it's on the screen. Okay, perhaps it's worth going through with Mr. Cook exactly the points so we can get it clear. So perhaps firstly, does the land strongly contribute to greenbelt purposes, i.e. checking the unrestricted sprawl? Let's deal with that one first.
But grey belt actually hasn't come in yet. We're still talking about laws. At the moment, the law is talking about green belt, and suddenly grey belt has been introduced with no debate about it.
Grey belt is in, and unfortunately we've got to deal with it.
So there's a couple of factual elements here. I was actually thinking about this, and I have to say, I mean, I've got concerns about grey belt myself, but the report in front of us is very detailed and very helpful. And one of the things that's very helpful about it is that it takes us through a series of steps and guides us as to, you know, the kinds of thought processes. Obviously, the thought processes that the officers have gone through, but also the thought processes that we would have to go through as members if you wanted to disagree with officers. So let's just look at that. Let's look at checking unrestricted sprawl. I mean, one of the interesting things here is it's very easy to feel that that site is immediately close to a built-up area, which might be an argument that you're checking unrestricted sprawl. But in fact, you've got, if you come from the Shenfield side, you've got open fields between the built-up area and the A12, and this site is on the other side of the A12. You've got a small number of properties which are relatively close to the site, but it's a very small number and they're very scattered, and it's not a built-up area. So they don't constitute sprawl. We're also told in the report that the site forms part of a wider transitional landscape at the edge of the urban area, and a proposal wouldn't represent a conventional urban extension or facilitate outward expansion of a large built-up area. There are gaps there, there's a main road there. The report makes it clear that at best there's a moderate contribution to Purpose A. And Purpose A is the strongest of those three as far as the report is concerned, because the other two, there's a very weak contribution. So if it's that one that you're arguing, you disagree with the report that it's moderate contribution, you think it's strong. But you really need to be able to back that up with facts and arguments.
Well, the usual thing the officers come up with when somebody wants to build something or put something on greenbelt land is that it is obstructing the greenbelt, the views of the greenbelt, etc., etc. That's not on there. Why? The items that are there are picked out precisely to be able to use greenbelt and turn it into greybelt. It is wrong, and the analogy put on page 42 describing greybelt land or describing how to turn greenbelt land into greybelt land does not, as I say, describe the land we are talking about. You can't have it both ways. You can't say it's greenbelt or greybelt and then decide that it's been used for something else, or it's scrubland, or it's not farmed, or it's not greenbelt. It's not. You're not taking away the visual amenity of the greenbelt, which you are, because you're just covering 230 odd acres with glass. It's quite scandalous, actually, that you can think that you can just change good farmland, good greenbelt, into greybelt and put solar panels on it because you're setting out restrictions stopping you from banning it.
Okay, I think we'll move on just at the moment. You did describe this as a criminal act, both morally and visually. I have to say, at the moment, from my point of view, you're not acting very well as a prosecuting lawyer. Councillor Patel.
Thank you, Officer, for preparing this report. I just want to make it clear that obviously this green belt, grey belt, whatever is going on anyway, but I just want to say this. I want to make it clear that I support the renewable energy, and I recognize the importance of reducing carbon emissions. However, supporting clean energy does not mean every location is appropriate for a large-scale development like this. My first concern is the loss of valuable farmland. Once productive farmland is covered with solar panels, it can no longer be used to grow crops or support local food production. At a time when food security, as been already discussed, is becoming increasingly important, we should protect our best farmland rather than replace it with industrial infrastructure. Secondly, there is an impact on local landscape. This development would significantly change the character of our countryside, replacing open field with extensive fencing, solar panels, security equipment, and associated infrastructure. This could affect the enjoyment of residents, walkers, visitors, as well as reduce the rural character that make our community special. Another concern is the impact on wildlife. While solar energy is environmentally friendly in terms of emissions, large development can disturb habitats, reduce biodiversity, and affect local ecosystem if they're not carefully planned and managed. Construction traffic and ongoing maintenance also deserve consideration. Increased heavy vehicle movement during the construction could damage local roads, create noise, and inconvenience to residents. Finally, I believe alternative sites should be explored first. Rooftops or warehouses, commercial buildings, and previously developed or brown lands should be prioritized before an open countryside and productive farmland should be considered for this sort of projects. Renewable energy is essential, but it must be delivered in the right places and with the support of local communities. We should not be forced to choose between protecting our environment and protecting our countryside. We can achieve both through better planning. In addition, no conditions can protect the outcome that's going to leave harm in 40 years' time. And in my view, 40 years is not a temporary arrangement. With all this said, I don't think I can support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patel. I'll come to Councillor Rigby just quickly, but there's a couple of things you've said there. Again, this is from my point of view. Mr. Cook might want to jump in as well. You said the land could no longer be used, but obviously, although you think 40 years is not temporary, this is a temporary application. It's a removable application, so the land could be used again for agricultural purposes. You said that it was, you thought that the best farmland should be protected. The report makes it very clear why this isn't rated as the best farmland, and it's rated mainly at 3B level. It's a very small percentage, which is 3A level, which is which is the where the break off between the best and most versatile land and the poorer land comes. And you also said, I believe, that this was an application that would reduce biodiversity. I mean, this is an application which will massively increase biodiversity. That's been made very clear by both Mr. Cook and by the applicants. I mean, you increase biodiversity by like 13 times as much as the regulations expect. So, I mean, the point here is there are strong opinions, and I understand people's opinions, and I understand local concerns about this, but we have to stick to the facts that are in front of us and the facts that are being presented. And if we don't agree with those facts, we have to come up with good arguments and good factual explanations as to why what we're being presented with is wrong. And at the moment, I'm not seeing that. Mr. Cook, is there anything you'd like to come on?
No, I think you covered the majority of that, Chair. I think the only thing to say in terms of construction traffic is actually the transport assessment kind of sets out that actually the effects aren't going to be that significant. And just to point out that neither the Highway Authority or National Highways have raised an objection on this scheme. I think that what I said earlier was that on average there'd be about 3 vehicular movements per day for HGV vehicles. That's going to be quite limited in the grand scheme of things. It is a temporary development. It will be for the construction period is anticipated to be between 9 and 12 months long. Overall, the effects are considered to be quite limited in that regard.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. Councillor Rigby.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank all those who addressed the committee this evening, and including those councillors who have spoken, and those particularly who are against the development. Thank you for the contributions. I'd like to ask Mr. Bell a question, if I may. Mr. Bell, is it your view that the section on Grey Belt from page 42 to 52 and in Appendix 1 is a reasonably authoritative statement of planning law and policy as it pertains to this development at this moment in time? That's my first question. My second question is to Mr. Cook. For the benefit of the committee and residents, can you reassure me whether the Grey Belt designation identified in those pages, particularly footnote 3 at page 49, would enable future development to the site, or would any other development be treated on its own merits? Those are my 2 questions. Thank you.
In answer to your first question, the answer is yes.
In answer to the second question, every application has to be considered on their own merits. So if an alternative type of scheme were put forward, there could be a different conversation about acceptability.
Do you want to come back, Councillor Rigby, or was that just... That's been answered. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the points, I think the footnote, which has just been referred to, again, is very helpful because, I mean, we've had the comment that approving this application would simply open the door to all kinds of other applications, including house building on that land. I mean, one of the big differences, obviously, between this application and an application of the kind that would be talking about housing being built on that land is that this application is temporary and reversible. Well, you can shake your heads, but the point is, that's the application. You're just putting some light touch solar panels on the ground, which can be removed, and as part of this application, will be removed. That's what's being agreed here. Whereas obviously housing, that's not going to happen. Therefore, that immediately takes you down a different line. You know, we have these flowcharts in terms of grey belt thinking. You start going down different lines. If an application is completely different to this application, which is in front of us, which is the one that we have to consider, and the only one we have to consider, then you go down a different process. You don't go through that pipe work in the same way, and you don't come out in the same place. So, and it's been made very clear in the report. And again, I think it's an excellent report, and I think that aspect of it, it's very useful that was already covered off, and I think it already has been covered off. Councillor Thompson.
Some of my views have already been shared this evening. But supporting this, for me, just basically means that we're grounded in our principles on Greenbelt. To go over a few things again, the use of the word temporary and 40 years, to me, I don't see how we get into one sentence. Yeah. Perhaps, Mr. Bell, you could... Normal planning applications would be on a 3 to 5 years on a temporary basis, but because of the product, what we're looking to put, or solar panels in this field, how can we go from a normal standard temporary works of 3 to 5 years to 40 years? I think is one of my questions. Also concerned about the wider spread of the planning impact that this holds. Again, it's been brought up, I think it just sets a vast precedent in the consequences of letting this go through. I just think it could be catastrophic for the rest of the Greenbelt in Brentwood as a general rule of thumb. Again, the size of it's an industrial site, yeah? I think some of the conditions, if you are going to put this through, cover some things. I don't see why we'd have to wait 15 years for it to look half reasonable and look like it's actually blended in with the countryside. I just think that's just beyond comparison. Some of the things, obviously the community bond, I heard the applicant say that's been put in. Decommissioning bond, I didn't see that mentioned anywhere. Yeah, we keep talking about the reversibility of it being over 40 years. What about if we do have a fire there? What's the contamination to the land? How long will that be contaminated for? What's the principles on that? Yeah. Again, I just don't see the public benefits for this. I don't see what the residents are going to gain out of this, apart from a massive blight on the countryside. So, thank you very much, but I will not be supporting this.
Thank you for that. Did you want to come in on that, Mr. Cook?
So, firstly, every application has to be determined on their own merits, and it doesn't set a precedent for future applications. They will be determined in accordance with planning policy at that time. Planting takes time to establish, and that is why we're being quite realistic that actually it is going to take a bit of time. But the harm is identified within the report that at the early stages there will be moderate to major adverse effects on the landscape, but that harm will decrease over time as that planting establishes. As I set out, there is a planning balance here. We have to consider the positives and the negatives. It is a negative that there is going to be an effect on the landscape, but that effect reduces. Just to be very clear about the community fund, maybe the easiest way to just set that out is that that is a goodwill gesture of the applicant. It does not form part of the application and should not be taken into consideration for members' determination this evening.
Looking at a lot of other projects of this scale that have gone on, the community fund is quite common, yeah? So is a decommissioning bond as well. We talk about clearing this site in 40 years' time, yeah? Where is our financial guarantee on this?
Yes, it is a common approach, but typically it's kind of a goodwill gesture, which is the case here. In terms of decommissioning, we have planning conditions in force if the application were to be permitted, which requires the site to be decommissioned and restored in accordance with a scheme. If the landowner is not complying with that condition, the council have enforcement powers to serve an enforcement notice on the breach condition for failure to comply with those requirements.
Thank you for that, Mr. Cook. I think it's also worth stressing, again, it's already been mentioned multiple times, that of all of the statutory consultees who have been consulted as a result of this development, there are no outstanding objections from anybody. I mean, you know, let's just go back to the issue about fire. There's concerns being raised about the possibility of a fire taking place. I mean, a fire can take place in this building. Obviously, we don't want it to. Fire can take place in all sorts of different places. At no stage of this application did the local fire service raise any objections at all. There was an objection at one stage from the there was an objection at one stage from I've lost the blooming place in the text. There was a temporary objection on the basis of concerns from the Environment Agency, in the basis of concerns around, not the concerns about the application itself, but on concerns about lack of information that had come along with the application as far as the BESS element and the various other elements which connect this site to the rest of the network. But once that information was provided, that objection was withdrawn. It was a holding objection, and then it was withdrawn. So the Environment Agency have no objection. There are no objections on the far side of this. There are no objections on the highway side of this. There are no objections from our internal people. There are no objections from any statutory consultees. heritage and landscape, there are no objections. There's no expert opinion that anybody who thinks this application is bad can point at to say, this is the reason for my judgment. People have the right to disagree with expert opinions, but they need, if they're going to disagree with expert opinions, they need to come up with a good counter-argument and some good facts to set up against something that an expert has said. We still haven't had anything that anybody's come up with that I've actually heard that's actually doing any of that. The statutory consultees are disagreeing with the points that the people who are against this application are making. Councillor Parker, do you want to come back? I mean, you've come back several times. I think we will very soon need to go to the vote on this.
What I can't understand is it says Greenbelt serves 5 purposes. 3 of them, or
ABDN.
but there's one in italics, C. I don't know why it's in italics, whether it shouldn't be there or whether it's, but it does say to assist in safeguarding the countryside from encroachment. That's what the green belt is there for. If you can't, if this is not encroachment, I don't know what is.
Councillor Parker, I'm kind of shocked that you just said that, because that does demonstrate that you haven't read what this report says very clearly in terms of the grey belt process. We have green belt, we now have grey belt. We may not like grey belt, but we have grey belt. And this report is extremely clear about what we have to do, how we have to think, the steps we have to go through. The reason why C is not part of that consideration is because the grey belt legislation says that C cannot be part of that consideration. That's what it says. That's what the report says. That's what you would know if you looked at that stuff. It's Councillor. You can dislike it. You can dislike it as much as you want. You haven't come up with a counter argument, and you've just demonstrated that you haven't properly read the report because you don't understand why C is not one of the considerations. I'm going to come back to, I saw Councillor Baksh. I'll come to Councillor Baksh, and I will come back to Councillor Patel, but we'll need to go to the vote quite soon on this. Councillor Baksh.
Thank you, Chair. I do have quite a few points with regards to this and questions that I want to ask the officer. So how would you like me to go through that?
Ask your questions.
I'm conscious that you say that you want to go to the vote, but are you applying a time limit on the questions?
No, you haven't spoken yet. Ask your questions.
Okay. So what I would like to say, given from what I've heard so far, that I support renewable energy in principle. My concern is not with the solar power. My concern is whether this particular site has been correctly assessed under the adopted development plan that we have and the revised Greenbelt policy. So for the officer, I have some questions regards the Brentwood local plan. Brentwood undertook a borough-wide Greenbelt review and released only specific allocated sites following exceptional circumstances. This application site remained protected. Can the officer explain why members should now conclude that the land no longer forms a strong part of the Greenbelt contribution when the council's adopted development plan deliberately retained it with the strategic Greenbelt framework when it was last reviewed?
So I draw members' attention to paragraph 6.75, which addresses this point. That study was commissioned or published at least in 2018. So this predates the current National Planning Policy Framework of 2024, where the Great Belt exception, etc., has been put forward. What is very clear from appeal decisions is that for decision-making purposes, the assessment needs to focus on the contribution made by the specific site under consideration rather than relying on a strategic parcel level assessment. So this falls within parcel 44A, which comprises a much larger area than the red outline boundary. So that is taken into consideration as part of the overall assessment.
Thank you. So you mentioned that the cumulative effects in the report have been assessed and that around 57 hectares is the amount so far. Can you tell me
how much of that was best and most versatile, and whether cumulative agricultural land impacts have been assessed separately from the cumulative landscape impacts?
Mr Cook, I'll allow you to answer that, but I will say, Councillor, this material, these questions, the answers to these questions are all in the report. If you've read the report, you would already know the answers to these questions. I'll let Mr Cook answer.
With respect, Chair,
no,
my
you've
questions
asked the
are from the report, having read the report.
Yep.
So I have read the report, and I'd like to hear from the officer himself.
Mr Cook.
I can't provide you an exact figure on the loss of agricultural land offhand because I haven't gone into that much detail on the previous applications. But obviously that would have been a material planning consideration that would need to be taken into consideration for those previous applications. I'm just trying to find the paragraph that that I've referred to in my report, which is from 6. I was going to say from 6.90. What I've effectively tried to do there is contextualise this in terms of how much greenbelt there was in the wider borough at the point of the greenbelt survey. So you do need to take into consideration that we've adopted the local plan, so the figures will be slightly different. I've been very clear about that. But the point is that actually, when you 6.92, collectively these developments extend to approximately 57 hectares. When considered alongside the current proposal, the total would amount to around 152, and that's the equivalent in terms of the Greenbelt study of 1.1% of the Greenbelt land within the borough as a whole. So the point I was trying to make is that actually, comparatively, this is quite a small area of Greenbelt for all of the renewable energy developments that have been approved or are proposed to date.
Got it, thank you. But if we don't have an analysis of the best and most versatile that we've lost, how can members properly understand the cumulative effect of the borough's finite stock of best and most valuable land?
Well, the first point would be that there is harm identified within the report, and that has to be weighed in the planning balance like it would have had to have been for the previous planning applications. But ultimately, this is a reversible development once it's decommissioned. Natural England, a statutory consultee for large-scale schemes where agricultural land classification is a consideration, have set out that quite clearly, is that there would be a very small amount of permanent loss of agricultural land quality.
And it's also worth saying that other applications obviously will have to go through the same process, the same kind of assessments. If you had an application which came in on land which was predominantly best and most versatile, it was predominantly grade 1 or grade 2, the officer opinion will be different. This is an application site where 92.4% of this land is 3B, which is below the best and most versatile level, and 7.6% of the land is 3A. There's a couple of slight differences in terms of the overall land of the application site and the land which is being covered by the panels themselves. So there's some slightly different percentages on that, but that's the information in the report. Have you got anything more to say?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Could you go back to the slide with the CGI, please? Thank you. So the application relies heavily on screening to mitigate the visual impact, but the screening, as we've heard, could take 15 years to reach maturity. Has a separate winter screening report been carried out to assess how this would look in the winter months? And I also have a question, is that to scale at the moment? Because we've heard that those panels can go up to 3 metres. The average height of a UK person, I believe, is around 1.65 metres. So the security fencing, for example, is only going to be 2 metres. So these potentially could be quite visible for some time.
I think the first thing to say is that this is a computer-generated image, so it's giving an indication of what the view would look like in terms of year 1 and year 15. The planting which is proposed, as set out within the report and within this presentation, would vary between heights of 3 and 4 metres in terms of the hedgerow. That would exceed the highest point of a solar panel, which is conditioned to be no greater than 3 metres in height. The second point was about de-leafing, and I'll come back to that in a second.
Yeah, that 3 to 4 metres could take up to 15 years, though. Is that right? In the schedule that you've laid out in the report, it could take 15 years to reach that 3 to 4 metres. Is that right?
So this CGI is suggesting that for 15 years, that would be the point where you would have maximum screening. But again, I have identified that within the report, it is clearly set out that there would be a moderate to major adverse effect in terms of the effect on the landscape, but that would reduce over time as planting establishes.
So no winter assessment?
To my knowledge, there is no specifics about a winter type assessment. There, generally with de-leafing during the winter periods, yes, there would be opportunities for more visuals into the site, but that would be a temporary period whilst things leaf again come into the spring.
Thank you. So I don't want to labour the point, but I just want to be clear what members are hearing today. Are we hearing that not only could it take up to 15 years before that screening becomes effective, but for many months of the year, that screening could also be completely useless?
So as set out within the report, it is a consideration, it does amount to harm, but you do need to factor in the planning benefits that are arising from the scheme. And as I set out within the presentation right at the end, is that I do not consider this to be an on-balance decision. In my opinion, the benefits strongly outweigh the harm that has been identified.
Okay, thank you. I will move on to some other...
Just for a second, Councillor Baksh, just to remind people, for those who want to vote against this application, the report says that the positives clearly and substantially outweigh the negatives. It certainly doesn't say there are no negatives. It says there are some, but the positives can clearly and substantially outweigh them. Anybody who wants to vote against this application needs to demonstrate to themselves and to everybody else who's going to vote on this that the negatives outweigh the positives. Now, again, I haven't heard anybody. People are picking up little bits and pieces. That pile of little bits and pieces needs to outweigh the positives of this application, which are also listed in this report. Back to you, Councillor Back.
Thank you, Chair. Just to come back on that briefly, yes, the report does say that about the positives outweighing the negatives, but it's important for us as members to understand what weighting has been applied to each area in the report. Yes, the report does mention certain aspects of the weighting, but asking questions, for example, of how the assessments have been carried out, what assessments have been carried out, that gives us an indication of how reliable that weighting is. And essentially, that's what we're here to do, is to establish whether the officer's judgment on that has been applied correctly. And we're questioning that as members appropriately. So I've got a question with regards to the fire elements. Can the officer direct the members to where the fire service considered the planning implications of repeated cable theft leading to damage of the battery infrastructure? If that assessment has not been undertaken, how can members be satisfied that the risk has been fully considered within the planning balance?
In my opinion, the theft of cabling would not be a material planning consideration, but an operational issue with for the site operator.
Well, it has been mentioned before about the long-term, the temporary nature of this on the land. So the operational, the statutory consultees have responded with regards to the operational nature. But obviously, if there's a battery fire and that damages the land, or there's an exclusion zone that the nearby residents can't access their homes for a period of time, or after the fire's put out, that area is smouldering for days, then that does come into play. So we're not just looking at the operational side of the statutory consultee with regards to the fire. I was asking specifically if there has been an assessment to carry out to look at the implications of things like temporary theft of the cables, which puts that infrastructure in danger, particularly the cooling of the batteries.
So firstly, in terms of the fire point, we have consulted the technical experts on this in terms of the fire rescue service, and they have outlined that they have no objection in principle to the scheme. They have suggested some conditions so that we can try and mitigate the potential for a fire in the future. And they will have their own operational standards requirements we have tried to condition this as much as possible about what to try and alleviate or mitigate, I should say, the concerns. In terms of the other point that you've raised, in my opinion, that is not material planning consideration.
And once again, if as councillors we want to disagree with statutory consultees who are the experts, we need to kind of demonstrate that there's some reason to think that our effectively amateur judgment and our amateur concerns can somehow outweigh an expert who says there isn't a problem. If the experts were saying there were a problem, you've got something to deal with. But we have experts, and particularly in terms of the fire service, at no stage through this entire process has the fire service raised any concerns. They have had no objections.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, well, let me come back on that. Designing out crime, for example, is a planning consideration. And when we're looking at the statutory responses, I'm satisfied that operationally it's fine. We've had reports back say operationally they're fine. What we're asking is the impact on the local residents around this development in reality over the period of that project. So on that, on designing out crime, the consultation on designing out crime appears to assume that the proposed security measures remain effective for four decades without examining whether the change in criminal activity could materially alter the operational requirements. So can I ask you, Officer, has the report considered rural infrastructure crime trends and the impact that this development would have on the neighbouring area?
So there's a security statement which has been conditioned, which is setting out the security measures that the applicant will be undertaking, including CCTV along the perimeter of the fence line, looking inward into the site. Facing in,
you said, not facing out. So facing in once they've already breached the site, as I understand it.
But the reasoning for that is to ensure that it doesn't overlook residents that might be walking past on or nearby properties. So you're trying to balance the amenities of residents in the nearby vicinity versus the security arrangements. But ultimately, the security arrangements are going to be really a matter for the applicant in terms of theft. We can try and mitigate as best as possible, but ultimately the planning is about determining whether this is an appropriate use of land and not operational requirements that are specific to the developer.
Right, now, Councillor, you've now had more than 5 minutes. You've asked multiple questions. They've been answered. I think there's also a couple of points. There's a couple of points that also need to be made here. The applicants themselves obviously don't want cable theft on their site. They will be doing everything they can to prevent cable theft. The CCTV will be looking inwards because if there's cable theft on the site, that's where the cable theft on the site would be taking place. The questions you've asked have been answered. Councillor Patel did want to come back. Is there still something you want to say, Councillor Patel?
Yeah, just a question for Mr. Cook, actually. For records, could you tell us that is there any other alternative site has been considered before choosing this Greenbelt site, please?
So the report details that the applicant submitted a site selection report, and that site selection report considered alternatives within a 2.5 kilometre distance of the site. It identified that there were no alternatives that could be provided to provide the specific development proposal, and equally that report also considered or factored in that if you were to choose an alternative site, then there is potential for other harms to arise. That could be in terms of effects on landscape, that could be in terms of effect on heritage assets. So yes, they have considered alternatives. We consider that to be proportionate to the scale of development and ultimately considered it to be acceptable.
Councillor, I know Councillor Rigby wants to come back. Councillor Barrett, you haven't spoken yet.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just to say here that it isn't our job to necessarily question the judgment of officers. They come to it based on their professional opinion on the weight, their own weighting and how they've done it as professionals. We might have a different weighting. If there is extra information that you don't think is in the report, that is needed in the report, please do that before the meeting so the officer can prepare it. The officer's doing his professional job and he's come to his judgment. We might come to a different one, but it's not our job to question his. Thank you.
We're not questioning
And
the judgment,
no,
we're questioning
no,
the methodology.
No, Councillor Barrett. No. Councillor Rigby.
Thank you very much, Chair. Two 2 points, both hopefully helpful. One is, from the discussion I've heard from the various councillors, both for and against the moval to refusal, there's been a lot of discussion about green belt and grey belt, and obviously that's caused a great deal of concern in and around the chamber. I do feel that some form of training on this issue has now become not just necessary, but urgent, so that councillors are fully informed as to this. There was an excellent briefing put forward in the papers, which is why I asked Mr Bell to confirm it to members for their benefit, and I believe that Mr Cook has given a pretty comprehensive statement on the policy that he understands as it applies to this application. But that doesn't take away from the need to have a briefing or training on this, and I would ask officers to take that forward as a matter of urgency, because I think that's important. I think the other thing to say is there has been a lot of back and forth in terms of the questions. I myself have benefited from the officer's answer to those questions. I think they've been very full. I think they've been very reasonable. Members will decide whether they wish to agree with it or not, but he has given a full and complete answer to each and every question that has been put with him, and I think that's in the traditions of officers within this council to do so, and I'm grateful to him for that.
Thank you, Councillor Rigby. Councillor Cuthbert.
Thank you, Chair. For you to Mr Bell. So far, I haven't heard any planning reasons that really stack up or even put forward for this refusal. And I'm concerned that we're being asked to vote on a motion to refuse this without that. Are we okay to do that? I mean, obviously not. I haven't got. I see where one side of this chamber seems to be, one group of the chamber seem to be, or side of the chamber seem to be thinking, but yeah, I'm just a bit uncomfortable.
Just to be clear, without any formal or proposed reasons for refusal, without proper assessment, I think we're at significant risk of costs here to vote on something which hasn't been assessed. I haven't heard anything with regards to the grey belt assessment. I don't understand whether green belt land strongly contributes towards the purposes. I have no understanding of that, save for some reference to maybe checking the unrestricted sprawl. That might be one thing, but I'm not clear on that. If members decide it's not grey belt and it's green belt, I haven't heard anything about very special circumstances. I'm not clear on any of this, and I think we're at real risk here unless we formulate proper planning reasons that have been properly assessed before we vote.
Thank you. So, I mean, effectively, I am finding it very difficult to be able to support a motion like that, based on what I consider to be quite strong words, to be honest, that effectively, you know, we would be making a grave error to continue with the down the current route. If I personally would like to see strong arguments for this before it actually ends up going to the vote. But that's just my personal opinion.
So, Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. You did instigate that I hadn't read the report, which is not true. I have read it twice, actually. But my basis of refusal on this has always been that I don't believe that the officers who have tried to do a very good job in explaining grey and green belt have made a case for this land to be pulled from green belt to grey belt. There is no case for it because it fails on everything. On page 42, it says, you know, it has to be land probably used beforehand, openness, etc., etc. There is not a good case for bringing this prime green belt farmland into grey belt. There is not a case for it. And that is the whole reason why this should not go ahead. The case should have some reason. I mean, we've done it before, we've looked at it and said we do this because it's surrounded by the railway on one side, motorways on another side, etc., etc. It made good sense for it to be pulled out of the green belt and used for development. This is open farmland. It's open land which is going to be abused, 230 acres of it, abused by filling it with solar panels. Again, there is no reason to suggest that that green belt is not going to be damaged by visually and by the development. So you cannot just come along and say, this piece of green belt is now going to be grey belt. It just does not work that way. And they have not, the officers, I don't believe, have made a good case for pulling it out of green belt into grey belt. And that is one of the reasons why this should be refused.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. So, from what I'm hearing, you are saying that the site makes a strong contribution to purposes A, B and D. That's grey belt. So grey belt is within green belt. It's a subset of green belt. So we're not pulling grey belt out of green belt. It's a subset of green belt. Sorry?
That's what you're doing with it, apparently.
I'm not doing anything with it. I think so if you want to go down that route, then the committee needs to explain to a potential inspector how you've come to the conclusion that it makes a strong purpose to checking unrestricted sprawl. So in the report, the officer has set out what government guidance tells us we have to assess those purposes against. Purpose A, to check the unrestricted sprawl of large built-up areas. So grey belt is concerned about the function of land use. Does it actually still contribute to these functions strongly? Not whether it's a piece of land that looks nice or shrub or whatever. Does it still contribute to those functions? From what I'm hearing, you're saying it does. The officer is saying, no, it doesn't. Not to a strong degree. He's saying it contributes moderately. And then the PPG, the government guidance, sets out how you make that assessment. So paragraph 6.76 leads you into how he's made that assessment. So it says the contribution, if it's strong, this is what the illustrative features would be. They are likely to be free of existing development, lack physical features in reasonable proximity, also likely to be adjacent or near to a large built-up area, and if developed, result in an incongruous pattern of development. So that's the resulting development that you'd be looking at. So his conclusion here is that it's open farmland, but already influenced by the A12, pylons, nearby residential edges. So the committee would need to say, for example, with purpose A, why it disagrees with that, because those are factual elements on the ground. You cannot argue with the fact that it's not close to the A12, that there are urbanising features, and that it's... sorry, I've lost my place here. So he goes on to say, within the wide transmission at the edge of the urban proposal represent a conventional urban extension. It's partly enclosed and subject to urbanising influences. So the committee needs to give a contrary to that. He stated those as facts. That is a fact, that it has those features. So to be able to argue against that, you'd need to be able to explain that. So overall, what we're saying is it does contribute to that purpose, but only moderately, not strongly, and that's the test. Just on landscape and visual impacts, which is different to openness, it's different to how you consider green belts. Visual impacts, the report acknowledges that there are harmful impacts. That's, again, a fact. There will be harm, but when you weigh that against the benefits that the officer has set out, he's saying that that harm doesn't overcome those benefits. So if the committee is saying, well, actually, we're going to take a contrary view, again, you would need to say, where is that, how is that harm so serious that it doesn't overcome those really high benefits that have been set out in the report. And just to be clear that the need for this type of development and use is accepted as being very high. So again, that bar is, in terms of visual impact and the harm, needs to be a really high. You need to evidence that it's really harmful. Does that help at all? Okay, sorry.
I mean, I would just say, I think the simple version of this is that Councillor Parker, I mean, from my point of view, Councillor Parker has got this the wrong way around. The boot is on the other foot. The officers have made a case. They've made a very detailed case, a very lengthy case, with an enormous amount of legislative information in terms of how we need to go through a thought process. Anybody who wants to go against the officer recommendation and to vote this down has to make a counter case, and it has to be a counter case which is stronger than the case which the officer has made. Now, I mean, this is a report. The point where we get to the recommendation for approval is page 85 of this report. There's an immense amount of detail. There's an immense amount of hard work that's gone on. Innumerable statutory consultees have been spoken to who are experts in their own fields. The report shows us that there are no objections from those consultees. The report shows us that when you weigh out the pros and cons, not just do the pros outweigh the cons. There are cons, but the pros significantly outweigh them, clearly and substantially outweigh them. Anybody who wants to vote against this, anybody who wants to vote this application down, has to come up with a counter argument. It's not for the officers to prove their case. They've already proven their case. They're the experts. If we want to take a different point of view, that's fine, but we have to come up with a strong counter argument, which is based on more than I think this or I feel that or you're not talking sense. There has to be some evidence behind it. Ms. Corrigan's just explained that extremely clearly. I mean, and the officers, Mr. Cook has explained that extremely clearly. I've got very grave concerns with the way that thought process is going. I know Councillor Baldock indicated. Do you want to come in right now?
Look, this whole Greenbelt Grey Belt legislation is extremely difficult to understand. I think it's a fudge, and you'd have got to be an expert to understand it. No matter how many times you read it, it still doesn't really make sense. It seems to me that a piece of land can be grey belt if it's being looked at for one use, but it would be green belt if it's being looked at for another use. Well, that sounds like quantum theory to me, with Schrodinger's cat, whether it's been observed or not. Now, to that end, I think it's fair for people to be confused and keep asking questions here, because as we discuss stuff, more, you know, you may read this report twice, for instance, but it's still questions come up while you're here and other people say stuff. So I guess that's the whole point. We know that statutory consultees often come up with complete counterintuitive decisions, and we've seen it on like especially highways. You know, we look at it and go, that's complete nonsense. But nevertheless, they're an expert, and unless we go and get our own expert, or somebody goes and goes to their own expert that trumps that expert, you've got to use that expert. Otherwise, when it comes to appeal, you're going to lose. And this is all about what's going to happen when it comes to appeal. Let's face it. We'll just end up losing money because we're sticking to our gut feel. And my gut feel is we shouldn't be building on green belt. But if the national policies say that we should, then we're going to have to, because it'll end up getting, it will get built on, and we'll end up getting a massive bill. Now, I know it's not part of the planning, but nevertheless, I think it is relevant. There's £25,000 promised in local funds. Is that in any way locked in? I don't know. Yeah. I do know that the solar farm that got installed in Herongate, in my ward, that was half the size of this. Herongate only took up perhaps 80% of it, and we got £43,000. in the community benefits, and we've had that money. It seems to me, okay, it's voluntary, but that seems less than half, so I wonder what that's about. And yes, I guess it's probably not a planning consideration, but, you know, hey-ho. And also the screening. It does seem to me that on these figures, we could have some more substantial screening sooner than 15 years. That's my thoughts that no one else has said so far.
Thanks, Councillor Bolder. I think the point that you made about the complications of grey belt are extremely pertinent, and I think it's I think there's a lot which is very fair, which is you've just said there. The 25,000 we've heard about that. That's a gift that's effectively. Oh, okay.
The other thing is we're losing farmland, yeah, and you're absolutely right about that. But again, I go back to the solar farm in Herongate. You can't even see it from the road. I struggle to see it. And it is farmed, as I understand. It's got sheep on it. Now, I know that's not perfect, but that improves the quality of the soil. So when it's handed back in 40 years, it's handed back with soil that's improved massively because basically sheep have used it for a toilet for 40 years and all the bugs and the insects get involved and bring the goodness into the soil. That's not happening here, and I don't know why. There was one other thing, but I can't remember it now.
No, I think we're going to go to the vote on this. No, Councillor, you've had ample time to speak.
I've not had one come back.
I think all the points which need to be made have been made. I think that I personally have extremely grave concerns about the failure of those who are speaking against this application to back up their opinions with clear facts, with references to facts, with references to experts, with demonstrations that the opinions that they're putting forward are substantial and can outweigh the opinions which come from experts who are saying the opposite to what they're saying. So I've got grave concerns about that. We have a motion for refusal, which has been seconded. We will go to the vote and we will see what the outcome of that vote is.
Can I point of order, please, Mr. Chair, with the monitoring officer?
The point that you want to bring up in the Constitution. That's the point of order.
Can I answer? Okay, thank you. So we're here to ask questions under the Constitution, and there's one line you've asked about the refusal point. I haven't been able to get to my point specifically with regards to giving that point of the refusal. So I think I should be allowed to make the point of one of the reasons that we should be able to refuse this, because one of the reasons is the interpretation before we move into the paragraph of looking at it as grey belt. So it is quite important if we're discussing it as inappropriate development or grey belt. So I think that members should be heard.
Okay, so the procedure rules is followed. Every member of the committee gets 5 minutes. You've all had more than 5 minutes. The chair has come back to you on many occasions. The mover of the motion is Councillor Parker. The mover of the motion is Councillor Parker and the seconder is Councillor McShane. You can't add to that now. We're going to the vote on Councillor Parker and Councillor McShane.
Would members please indicate for or against the motion when their name is called? Councillor Minot.
Against.
Councillor Cuthbert.
Against.
Councillor Baksh.
Is it against refusal?
For refusal. Or against refusal.
For refusal.
That's a 4.
Yeah.
Councillor Baldock.
Against.
Councillor Dr. Tim Barrett.
Against.
Councillor Gorton.
Against.
Councillor McShane.
For.
Councillor Parker. Councillor Patel. Councillor Rigby.
Against.
Councillor Thompson. Thank you, members. That's 5-4 and 6 against. So the motion is carried. Is lost.
Lost.
Sorry.
Lost, crucial difference.
Yeah.
Right, okay, so I will move the counter motion. I will move the motion for approval. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
So, we've already had a very detailed discussion of this. I don't propose to go through, I mean, I've got enormous amounts of stuff that I could read out. I would basically be reiterating what the report says. I think the fact that we've had a discussion of the kind that we've had against the motion for refusal demonstrates the strength of the argument. I will say once again, I think Mr. Cook's report is exemplary. It's very, very helpful. It takes one through. For those who have concerns about this application, and I know there are numbers of people who have concerns about this application, the point here is not that people who are thinking of voting in favour of it have no concerns. We do have concerns. And this is also, as we were told at the beginning, we shouldn't be thinking party politically about this. You have had people, certainly Councillor Worsfold, Councillor Sankey, who are on the administration side, who have expressed their concerns about this. So this is definitely not an administration versus opposition argument. I have concerns about this application, but the report says to me that the concerns I have about this application have stronger counter-arguments against them than they have in favour of them. And that is what I have to come back to. It's a very well-written report. The arguments in favour are proper planning arguments, and the arguments against are not. And we haven't yet heard, despite the length of time that's been discussed here, we haven't yet heard any robust planning argument against this application, and we've already had the motion against this application fail. So we've had a motion for moved and seconded. I mean, unless anybody has got anything really useful to say which hasn't already been said, I think we ought to go to the vote. Yeah.
Can I just confirm that your motion is to approve subject to the additional conditions in the presentation?
Absolutely subject to the additional conditions. The other thing is, several people have raised the concern about the length of time that it might take for the screening to take place. I think the 15-year business is a little bit misleading simply because the image was 15 years later, and, you know, I know from my back garden some plants suddenly grow fast and some plants don't. So 15 years, I think, is a bit of an illusion. But I know that there were concerns that some people had. So I don't know whether there's any possibility of trying to put anything in which would attempt to speed up the screening process as part of the conditions. But I would take your guidance on that, or obviously another officer.
I mean, as part of the landscaping condition, we can consider if there's scope for some semi-mature planting, but that would probably be the best that you could achieve.
Yeah, the only, I mean, there was a bit of a discussion beforehand about this, and the only concern I have with the more mature the plants you put in, the harder it is to actually get them established in your new location. And I understand that's the reason why obviously you put relatively small plants in to begin with, because that's much easier to get them established, and then they'll grow much better, and then they'll effectively ultimately provide better screening. And I think it's been helpful that, again, we have this admission that to begin with there will be visual impact to this, and it will be a negative visual impact. So it's really about, I think there's an aspiration there. I don't think we're likely at this point to get to a wording. We could do what we have previously done, which is to say that if there's a way of boosting that wording, that could potentially be done afterwards. But the concern has been expressed, and I'm sure there are people that would like to see, if there was a way of improving it, they would like to see a way of improving it. Personally, I'm not entirely sure whether there is, but I understand the concern. I mean, I have walked those paths. I've even walked the paths which we're told are severed by the A12. I do know the area. So, I mean, you obviously, if you thought there was a way of coming to some wording right now, that would, I mean, we could do that, but I'm assuming there probably isn't.
I mean, in my opinion, it could be worthwhile to add an informative onto any decision to approve to set out that the committee would like to see semi-mature planting as part of the landscaping scheme. The only thing I'm just conscious of is that, you know, we need to make sure the condition meets the 6 tests, and is it reasonable, etc., to request semi-mature planting at that stage, you know, you'll be aware of other applications where it's been difficult for that to actually grow and take place. Yeah.
Okay, right. Well, we've discussed it, and you know that's been put into the process. We may get a better solution there. So there's a motion that's been moved and seconded. I'm aware that there's a couple of people who've indicated speak. I mean, we've spent an hour, 2.5 hours over this so far, and this is one item. Has anybody got anything to say that literally hasn't been raised at all yet? Councillor Gorton.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies for extending this meeting yet further. Just a simple request about the construction traffic management plan and condition. Could it be made absolutely clear that the only route that construction traffic will use to access the site will be from junction 12 on the A12 down the short bit of Roman Road to the Woodvale roundabout, and it's not absolutely clear. Condition 9B, confirmation that construction traffic, including HGVs, shall access the site via Roman Road. What it really needs to say is only from the south, exiting the A12 at junction 12. This is important for me and for my residents because we do have a problem in Mount Nessing with HGVs trundling up and down the Roman Road through the village centre where there's a primary school, there's a nursery and another one being built. There's 3 pubs, there's a play area, there's a crossroads in the middle. I think this needs to, the condition needs to be made really clear that access will only be from the south, from junction 12, and obviously exiting the reverse. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gorton. So obviously Councillor Gorton suggested some extra wording there. He said, what I've written down is traffic only from the south exiting the junction on the A12. Would that be acceptable to add to 9B, Mr. Cook?
So the intention of the existing outline construction traffic management plan is to ensure that vehicles only access via the Roman Road coming off the A12. The purpose of the condition is to secure it and confirm final routing arrangements in agreement with National Highways and the Highway Authority. In my opinion, the condition is robust enough to ensure that you would be avoiding Mount Nessing area and so on, because the expectation is that the vehicles will be coming on and directly off of the A12 and doing that very short distance to the site access.
And it is a very short distance. I mean, I think it's a good point, Councillor Gorton, and I know you did mention it when we were having discussions earlier on. Are you happy with that response? I mean, I think the point is this is something about which there will be further discussion, and we have now absolutely input your wording into that. We would very much, personally, I would agree with you, I would very much like to see that as strong as possible, so that there was as little as possible chance of any traffic using any other roads. I mean, the point here is the distance between the A12 and that access point is extremely short. It's very handy that it's so short. And obviously it would be an enormous pity and it would cause problems if traffic was using other routes. But are you happy with that, Councillor Gorton?
Yes, I am, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody else have anything that literally has not been raised before? Councillor Baldock?
It was only that, as this was touched on, whose responsibility is it to replace this afterwards? Is it the landowner? Is it the farmer? Just to clarify, because the solar farm could go bust, so they won't be doing it. Does it get put to the farmer? It's like, right, it's your land, you've got to do it, and if you don't do it, we'll be the bailiffs will be taking your land? Or is it what?
Planning permission runs with the land, so it would be the responsibility of the landowner.
Okay, so I'm not seeing any other hands. We will go to the vote. There's a motion for approval, which has been seconded.
Thank you, Chair. Would members please indicate for or against the motion when their name is called? Councillor Minot.
For.
Councillor M. Cuthbert.
For.
Councillor Bash.
Against.
Councillor Baldock.
For.
Councillor Dr. Barrett.
For.
Councillor Gorton.
For.
Councillor McShane.
Against.
Councillor Parker.
Against.
Councillor Patel.
Against.
Councillor Rigby.
For.
Councillor Thompson.
Against.
Thank you. So that's 6 for and 5 against. So the motion to approve is resolved.
Thank you for that. Right. We have no urgent business after this item. That was the last item on the agenda. So that was our last planning committee before August. I hope everybody enjoys their August.